everyone. Let's get started. Thank you for joining our forest side chat. Did you get what we did there? We decided a fireside chat wouldn't be on the theme of sustainability. So we are made it a forest side chat. So thank you for joining. Thank you, Brian, for making the time and being here with us today. So audience, please feel free to ask questions as we go. This is really supposed to be conversational to educate our industry about carbon emissions and global climate change as it relates to advertising. So there's no dumb questions or questions that are off limits. You can put them either in the chat or ideally in the Q&A section down on the bottom part of your Zoom. And I'll just introduce myself. I'm Allie. I'm the COO at Chalice. Chalice is a custom AI company, sort of building upon what Brian had built originally on AppNexus in terms of continuing to build open programmatic advertising. And I'm excited to learn a lot more about this topic alongside everyone else. We're partnered with Scope 3 on actually optimizing to reduce carbon emissions from advertisers' data. And I'm sure Brian will talk a bit about what that looks like. So, and let me just introduce Brian as well. So probably doesn't need an introduction, but Brian is the CEO of Scope 3. He belongs on the Mount Rushmore of ad tech, I would say. His work at Right Media and then as CEO of AppNexus was the genesis for what we now call programmatic advertising. He sold AppNexus to AT&T and then turned to his passion for sustainability. He founded a company called Waybridge and is now leading Scope 3. He's an inspiration to us because of his work in creating a future that empowers advertisers to live by their values. And so with that, Brian, I'd love to just ask first, like, where are you in the world today? And how are you doing?
Well, I'm here in the Brooklyn forest and I'm doing great. It's the first day of summer for my daughter. So you may hear her running around downstairs with one of her friends. So I apologize.
Nice. That's a good first day to have, first day of summer. Jealous. So Brian, I'd love to understand, what was the moment when sustainability became a passion of yours? Was it something early, later on? What was the genesis of it?
I think for me, you know, after AppNexus, I tried to figure out what to do with my life. You know, I have this passion for building and creating systems. And I love working with partners and customers and people just to solve these big, complex problems. And I really wanted to find a way to go drive systemic change, you know, to learn every single day, to teach like we're doing now. And just that tension of like making big, crazy promises that you have to then deliver on. All of that really ties back to wanting to do a startup. But I wasn't really that motivated by, you know, making billions of dollars. I wanted a reason, I don't know, to come to work every day. And sustainability is kind of the mix of all those things. It's an incredibly difficult problem. It matters a lot to people, including said daughter. It takes every ounce of my creativity and drive to make it happen. And I get to work with incredibly smart people every single day, both at Scope 3, at our partners, even our customers. Everyone is just really curious, smart, and wants to see this happen. I can't really think of a better way to spend, you know, my retirement on Mount Rushmore. I don't really like that. But if I have to be on a mountain, I might as well be up there for something useful.
Nice. Thanks. We put you on Mount Rushmore. You can decide whether or not you want to stay. So you took an interesting detour out of ad tech and then back in with Scope 3. What did you learn of your detour out of it?
Yeah, well, I kind of thought that like I've been deep into supply chains and ad tech for 10 years. And I was like, maybe we can teach the real world something. Like maybe all this crazy stuff we've been doing might make the real world better. I had a friend who was a commodities guy, and he said, there's no tech in commodities. This whole idea of moving physical commodities around the world, like if you could take that incredible brain, that you've built in the ad world and apply it here, think of the impact. And so during the pandemic, I actually went and took an MIT course on supply chain management, like a year-long graduate course, to try to understand how the real world really works. And there was this one module about sustainability, and it had a picture of a banana, and it said, the carbon footprint of a banana, and it had like a heat map, and it was different if the banana was shipped to LA or to Houston, because the banana's carbon footprint changed the further away you got from the port.
Right.
I was like, my head just exploded. You mean bananas don't have a single carbon footprint? I guess that's obvious if you think about it, but it made me think back to ads. That means that depending on the path an ad takes from the publisher to the consumer, from the publisher to the advertiser, the same ad could have more than one carbon footprint. And I just went, wow, like we have no idea what's the carbon impact of this. And I just couldn't stop thinking about it. So it turns out that the real world taught me something about digital supply chains that I had to just run back and go do in this world.
Nice. I love that. So could you educate folks like me who might not be entrenched in this, first into some of the basics? So what are scope 3 emissions, and how does that compare to scope 1 and 2?
So this is probably 25 years old now, this idea. But when people started to understand our carbon footprint as an economy, the first place they looked was the people who are actually burning coal or nuclear, or creating electricity. And they called that scope 1 because that's the actual place it happens. But they realized that if you just connect to the electricity wires, you could see exactly who's using the electricity, and you could draw a very clear path. So if you're, running a, Tesla charging station, you're directly pulling from that grid. And so we could trace those emissions straight to you. And they call that scope 2 because it's one hop away from the source of the emissions. But then if you look downstream one more step, what about the entire supply chain that builds that Tesla? Well, wait a second, like that's thousands of companies, lithium and metals and all this stuff and manufacturing and robots and I don't know, all the other stuff. What about that? Shouldn't we account that into what's happening? And they called that scope 3. And if you measure those 3 scopes, most companies, especially in our industry, WPP is 1.7% scope 1 and 2, 98% scope 3.
Right.
Because everything is really this big, complex supply chain. So what that means is that the only thing that matters is supply chains, which, of course, since I'm obsessed with supply chains, like what better industry to go focus on than sustainability, where literally the value chain, the supply chain is everything. And that's what we call the company scope 3, because it's just a sort of sneaky sustainability way of saying supply chain sustainability.
Right. And that sounds like all accountable in some way, shape, or form. We're all creating the situation that we're in and need to take action around it.
Yeah. The CEO of Unilever in Australia and New Zealand said yesterday, if you don't think sustainability is your problem, you don't understand the problem.
Yeah. Speaking of the problem, how significant is advertising in the grand scheme of global climate change?
I mean, in the scheme of things, I can make 2 arguments to you. One is that we don't burn anything, we don't melt anything, we don't really move anything, and therefore it's relatively small. The only thing we really do is we spin up a bunch of servers to do programmatic targeting. I can make a different case though, which is that something like $9 trillion of consumer spending behavior will be influenced by advertising over the next 3 or 4 years. And we make decisions about what ads we show and where they show them that fund the entire internet and that change the behavior of consumers all across the globe. And if you wanted to choose one high leverage point where you could actually influence the course of the human economy, probably advertising is not a bad place to start. unless you could like go plant like robot bugs in the heads of every senator in the US Senate. That might be slightly better, but pretty much the same level.
I believe that is a political B2B marketing strategy that someone is working on, the robot bugs and the Senate sprays.
That might be a good movie. Yeah. So if we can't do that, advertising is a great place to operate because it's so high leverage. It's almost like a scope 4 because it's like the influence that we have from this supply chain to everything else. Every supply chain touches ads.
Yep.
Period.
Yeah, that makes sense. We have a question from someone in the audience about how much carbon does a single ad impression generate on average, and what drives those things up and down?
So our average right now is about 1 gram of carbon per ad, which means 1 million ads is a metric ton, which is about a flight back and forth from New York to London for a single person in a coach seat.
Wow.
It's kind of shocking how much carbon we're talking about. And in terms of where it comes from, about 10% of that is the actual creative in most cases, especially for a banner. A good bit, depending on the kind of content, let's say a third, comes from content production, which is all the offices and journalists and everything else that goes into producing real journalism. Obviously much less if you're dealing with a content farm. And then the rest, about 55%, tends to be what we think of as the media supply chain, ad tech.
Interesting. And is scope 3 focused really on that last piece, the media supply chain? Does it touch any of the former two?
We're focused on measuring all of them and addressing all of them, but that's the one where we have the most agency. Right. So if you go back to my banana example, you don't have that many options to ship bananas. You've got boats and you've got boats. There's no train from South America to the US that I know of. Whereas in programmatic, we have myriad ways. We have so many acronyms, like choose acronyms, and we can figure out, is PG better than PMPs or OMP or, PUG I heard recently. I don't know what those are, but we keep coming up with new ideas. And so if we had a good model, like a data set that could tell us how different things behave, when we innovate, we can use that model to decide, is this innovation helping the environment or not? And I have great optimism that whenever this industry is agreed on the rules, we are the most creative people in the world at figuring out how to go right up against those rules. Like set a line, we will hit that line and go no further. My job is to make sure that line is very accurate as to what's actually going into the environment, so that when we're optimizing around this, our optimizations actually suck carbon out of the air. So I'm basically trying to harness all of the creative, collective intelligence of this industry to save the world.
No small feat. Sure. I have more questions from the audience around what the methodologies are that Scope 3 uses, and how advertising is collaborating with other industries and measuring and optimizing efficacy and combating greenhouse gases.
Yeah. So our methodology is basically to take any data set we can find that indicates what the supply chain looks like, and combine that with some proprietary and other like first-party data sets. So as a simple example, think of an ads.txt on a web page. That gives us an indication of what the supply path will look like. We don't fully trust it, but we can then add to that supply chain data from buyers and DSPs or trading desks. Sometimes they'll contribute that data to us. When we work with a SSP, as an example, we ask them to tell us what their supply chain looks like, how many bid requests they get from publishers, how many do they send to DSPs. Don't fully trust that either. I think you'll hear in general that we're fairly skeptical about everything we see. We're trying to assemble as many pieces together to get a picture. We also get real-time electricity grid data from a company called WattTime. We have a consumer panel where we can actually see where consumers go within sites, which is helpful because a lot of DSP reporting is at the site level, right? But there's no such thing as a site. The home page will have a very different layout than an internal page. How do we figure that out? Even inside a geography, Pennsylvania has 2 grids. east and west of Pennsylvania have very different electricity mix. So we have to come up with algorithms to say, well, if someone says they're in Pennsylvania, what do we do? So all of that is to say that we're basically piecing together all of this different data to try to come up with the most accurate picture we can of where these emissions come from, all the way down to asking for AWS or GCP reports of the emissions from the data center. We don't trust those guys either because they use different methodologies. You know, AWS is what they call market-based and GCP is location-based. And they actually provide a 24/7 picture that Amazon doesn't. So we have to have a very sophisticated tool called a fudge factor, which is basically trying to understand what would AWS be if they reported as accurately as Google. So that's a lot. It's a mouthful and a half. If anyone's curious, we'd be happy to share our methodology deck. We're also about to come out with mobile app. We're working on digital out of home and CTV. We're expanding globally. There's a whole bunch of work we're doing to try to get our hands around the whole digital world. And we appreciate feedback. So we know we don't have all the answers. We definitely don't have all the data. So if anyone's interested in collaborating, we'd really, really love that.
Yeah, so interesting. I feel like being one of the OG folks in programmatic, you've also, it's really built your muscle around like, no, we don't trust but verify. We like verify and continue to be skeptical and verify more and more.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. Like that is the only way to survive in this industry is just to always, you know, ask the next question. But we do this from a very generous position. So one thing I want to say is that it's really important to me that we don't expect people to be perfect, that we're all trying to make progress towards something. It's so easy to do a gotcha or a cancel, you know, and I don't think that's the right intention. So one thing you'll see us trying really hard to do is if, like, let's say Trade Desk, when they turn off open bidding, you know, I wrote a blog post saying, wow, great job. I did not write a blog post that said, hey, everybody else, you're not doing the right thing. Now, I might have put that on Twitter, but it was a very positive thing. Like, you should do that too. So we don't want to name and shame. You'll never see us do that because I don't believe in it. I think we should do the opposite of that and say, anybody on this path, great job, you know, do more, and then show everyone else the path forward, because it's just a much more positive, you know, I don't know, like loving way to operate as an industry. And I think that skepticism is not in the way of a deep belief in human goodness and the ability of technology to achieve good things, as well as often not so good things. I guess I'm just saying I'm an optimist, a skeptical optimist.
Got it. And kind of drafting off of that, are you seeing a groundswell across advertisers and agencies in thinking about sustainability? Are you having to do a lot of, you know, base level education, or are you seeing that advertisers and agencies are starting to take this seriously?
To be honest, I've been kind of shocked with the feedback. So at the beginning of the year, we wrote down some like OKRs for ourselves. And one of them was try to get 50 articles written this year, like one a week, about sustainable advertising. And by the end of February, I was just like, I can't keep up. Like, I'm just not even going to try to keep a list. I'm just going to declare victory. Over the weekend, I started making a Google Doc with every event about sustainable advertising that I knew of, including this. And I mean, it's amazing. There's 20 plus events scheduled right now, and there's probably a lot more. It is an incredibly hot topic, and it's both brands and agencies. There's a ton of curiosity. I do think education is our greatest opportunity and our greatest challenge, which is that this is complicated stuff, and people join the conversation at different places. So you might have had an environmental studies major in college and know everything there is to know about the picture, or you might be somebody who's been in a professional role and never really thought about what this means. And so it's such an important part of, you know, partnering with Chalice is that you can bring this idea and these concepts to a set of people and customers who we may never talk to. And we've been doing that with agencies, brands. Like, we just want to help everyone understand this. And the more, you know, you joked before we started about a YouTube channel. I don't think that's crazy. Like, why is there not a collection of stories and videos and interviews about sustainable advertising? Maybe I need another Google Doc or maybe we should not use Google at all, and find some better way. But I kind of think this is our mission, is help everyone in this whole industry. 1 million people work in this industry. If they would all join the movement that we're creating together, I don't mean you and me, I mean the industry is creating, the world's going to change, and it's going to have a huge impact.
Yeah, I agree. Who do you see taking real action today?
Well, the company I'm most impressed with, which I never thought I would say, is Group M. They came out with a very strong position last year and said, we're going to get to net zero for our entire media supply chain by 2030. And we're going to see at least 50% reduction of emissions as part of that. And, they mean it. Like, they're investing an immense amount across the organization for that, but they're not the only holding company. We've worked really closely with IPG media brands who are doing amazing things on this. Havas is way out in front. Omnicom is doing a ton. Publicis is doing a ton. Dentsu is doing a ton. We've had every single major holding company reach out to us to want to do measurement or a pilot or even try our new green media product idea. I mean, I would never have thought we would have had every single holding company leaning in on this. And so, I don't know. I don't want to give like a blue ribbon. I think we should give all of them a blue ribbon, because that's incredible.
Yeah, that's so encouraging to hear that everyone's taking it seriously, taking action. Group M's potentially leading the way. It's really cool. What about the group here, right, that we have convened here, our different agency and brand side folks? I think a lot of the audience that we're speaking to today are people making, programmatic decision makers. So some are in platform, some are in the platform every day, but are making the calls about what a programmatic ad buy looks like. What would be your advice or direction to this group in terms of what kind of action they could take?
Well, the first one is to be able to measure. I think just, we're all programmatic people. Like, numbers are the only thing that we can really rely on. So whether that's something you get from your DSP, you get from a third-party vendor, something you do yourselves. If you want an API key, just let me know. But I think if we all start with measurement, it'll tell us what to do next. The second thing I would say is we have to think about the system, that a lot of the emissions come from publishers and their decisions. And every publisher makes good decisions. So I've heard people say, oh, publishers have too much ad tech. They have ad tech because it makes them money and it's not killing their consumer experience. So if we want to change that, we have to change the economics. And that means bidding more for inventory if it's lower carbon, not if it's higher carbon. You can do that through Chalice Carbon Optimizer. You can do that by reaching out to publishers and exchanges and asking them to make media carbon neutral for you. We'll probably invent new ideas. But the bottom line is we have to change the economics for publishers so that they make more money when they're greener. And that's the thing I keep coming back to. Everything else just goes back to that, because that's the source. However, I say that, but you know what? If we could convince DSPs to turn off open bidding, or if we could even better convince SSPs to turn off Google open bidding, that knocks it out at the source. That's much more scalable than every publisher doing it. So I do think we can do things at the industry level. I've been lobbying IAB Tech Lab to make this a priority. Launch the IAB Climate Lab, who knows? We need more industry groups who can think technically about this, who can help us figure out how we actually move forward in structured ways. So I could talk all day about this, but if you are in the industry, the best thing you can do is measure and then take some action to change the bidding math.
Yeah, and it seems like at least one topic that could really bring the industry together, right? Holding companies don't need to compete on this. Everyone can join together and we all win, right?
Totally.
Cool. On the measurement front, I am going to plug Chalice will do a free assessment of any advertiser's carbon footprint. We can do that based on a handful of DSP reports. So if anyone in the industry or in the audience is interested in getting started with measurement, we make it easy. And what you would get back is an assessment of what your carbon footprint looks like across your supply chain using Scope 3's data, of course. So I have one more question, which is that, so we've seen the Trade Desk make an announcement about reducing their carbon footprint. We've seen OpenX make an announcement about being carbon neutral. With all of these different groups in the supply chain making these announcements, is there still the need for individual advertisers to take action?
I think there is, because it's not just the media supply chain, for one thing. So there's also creative delivery, there's creative production, where there's still, people will fly 17 people to a photo shoot. Doesn't make any sense. We actually need to make sure that we measure all the steps. And then, OpenX, I really respect for what they're doing. I think every company should do a carbon neutral process. That was for their Scope 1 and Scope 2 and some of their Scope 3, but they're still in the value chain for a whole bunch of other pieces.
Yeah.
And so one thing I'm excited about for OpenX is then they said, we want to take the next step. Can you help us understand our impact on everybody else? And that's really cool, because it does mean that they see real purpose. Like, I think they're doing this for the right reasons, and they see a commercial opportunity that if they can really be the greenest, then they're going to get more spend from agencies and advertisers. But that ties back to the advertisers. You have to keep the pressure on. You have to make sure your agency knows you care, and you'll give them more money if they keep focusing on this. And same thing for agencies. Can't take our eye off the ball. Make decisions based on climate, and the entire supply chain will change. So that's my advocacy for all of us, is continue to make decisions based on climate, and climate will become what people use to try to attract better decisions. So that's how we all fit into that virtuous cycle and that value chain.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure it's not an either or proposition, right? It's not either ad performance or being carbon neutral, right? It's can work together. And I think that's what we've been really excited about partnering with you on, is taking this data, putting it into someone's optimization towards good performance, and being able to balance the two.
Completely agree.
We are right at the half hour. So Brian, I really appreciate your time. Thanks to the audience for some really great questions. We will be posting this on our YouTube channel to be created. And yeah, everyone have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you so much, Ali. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. Bye, everyone.